Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show on this 6th day of June 2020. Up first, fire danger graphic showing kind of an expanded area of extreme fire danger up in the upper Yukon Valley, Yukon Flats there, either side of the Yukon River, and also up along the lower portion of the Porcupine River, with high to very high fire danger surrounding that over to the eastern border and then extending down in toward the greater Fairbanks area. But precipitation and conditions improved there over the north central interior of the AKwx Valley, definitely down in the Kuskokwim Valley, and fire danger pretty darn low over southern Alaska. But there are some areas of higher fire danger, but not as extensive as it has been as you head west toward the eastern Seward Peninsula and up toward the Selawik Valley and Noatak Valley areas, and then a little farther downstream in the Yukon River. Otherwise, looking really not too bad for this time of year, fire danger-wise. And it'll probably stay extreme in the upper Yukon Valley. Really no precipitation expected there over the next couple of days as conditions remain pretty well in the stationary status quo with mostly sunny skies, temperatures in the 70s in the afternoon. For the next frame here, this is Glen Alps parking area, and Saturday, full house as it usually is, but you can see there on the left, upper left, clouds building again, showers, thunderstorms starting to develop once again over the Chugach Mountains. That after about 2/3 to 3/4 of an inch of precipitation fell late yesterday afternoon, with showers that moved off the Chugach in over Glen Alps and down into portions of East Anchorage. Could see a repeat of that again today, possibly. Next frame here showing Willow looking southeast. Definitely thunderstorms in progress currently over the Talkeetna Mountains, and those could drift west-southwest and probably will likely continue to increase into early this evening up in that area. Next frame here, different story. Portage Glacier, looking out over Portage Lake from the Visitor Center. Clear skies, maximum sunshine, ceilings visibility is unlimited there for the west side of Portage Pass. East side, same story. Whittier, looking northeast, nothing but clear skies. Couple of clouds there, but maximum sunshine. Temperatures both locations about 61 in Whittier at mid-afternoon, while Portage was at 65 degrees. So the pass definitely open, but you may see some marginal VFR show up there later tonight, especially on the Whittier side. Satellite imagery showing clouds developing once again, showers and thunderstorms, as I mentioned, from the Talkeetna Mountains northward to the Alaska Range, and then a little bit west of Fairbanks, thunderstorm activity, and a lot more isolated there over toward northward along the eastern Alaska Range, but sunshine over the upper Yukon Valley. And a system there coming across the Bering Sea. Really not all that organized, kind of weak, but there is a surface low associated with that westerly flow across the southern Bering Sea, carrying surges of moisture eastward, and one organized one about to drop into the eastern Aleutians later tonight and tomorrow. Otherwise, the southeast coast, not too bad, some sunshine, but showers developing over along the eastern border, drifting westward, and that tended to increase the clouds across the southeast coast during the afternoon hours. But rainfall amounts, Hoonah at 3 p.m., only 1/100 of an inch, as well as Petersburg. So the heavier showers still along the eastern border there, but those will probably spread westward here over the next few hours. On the chart, you can see low pressure there near the central Alaska Range, near Healy, centered more or less, with thunderstorms again developing western Cook Inlet, the Talkeetnas, and on up toward the Koyukuk Valley areas, but some sunshine over the north slope as the low clouds tend to burn off, but persisted along the Arctic coast. with low clouds and fog on the increase over the northern Bering Sea. Gamble at a half mile in fog this afternoon, but Tin City is still reporting 10 miles. And winds still on the brisk side for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, with 35-mile-an-hour gusts reported at Dead Horse, lighter winds on the west side. Weak warm front spreading some warm front moisture in toward the eastern Aleutians, and then a little more widespread back with the main cold front toward the Amchitka area in the western Aleutians, but even that's not too heavy. And we'll see isolated showers developing over Kodiak Island. Same thing for the Alaska Peninsula, but nothing too terribly heavy, although Pedro Bay had about just under half an inch of rain in the last 12 hours, with Iliamna picking up a quarter of an inch. Aniaxine, same thing, a quarter of an inch. Also Sleepmute, a quarter of an inch. So some pretty good rainfall, again, keeping fire dangers low across much of southern Alaska. And some showers developing over the Copper River Basin, but more extensive over the Talkeetnas, with thunderstorms already in progress there. For tonight, the showers, thunderstorms will diminish this evening and probably end around midnight, but the showers will persist in the green shaded areas there until tomorrow morning throughout the night, including northeast Bristol Bay, and then the showers over the Panhandle, pretty much more widespread over the central and northern areas, scattering out down to the south. Kodiak Island could see some clearing, definitely dry, light winds there, and light rain, fog, and drizzle spread in and cover the east or the central Aleutian areas from Kiska Island and extends eastward to the Fox Islands, with the best chance of rain occurring from Unalaska in toward Accoon Island, False Pass, and Cold Bay, along with King Cove. Pretty good chance of some moisture. Definitely IFR conditions covering all of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula. Low clouds and fog, IFR into Bristol Bay as well, and also over areas of the Gulf of Alaska. Winds diminishing along the eastern Arctic coast, but again won't end completely, but should become lighter, will become lighter and variable from the western Arctic coast southward into the Bering Strait. So look for considerable low clouds and fog in those areas, joining up with the batch over the Bering Sea there with the light winds and IFR. So for tomorrow, Sunday, looking about the same, less wind though, eastern Arctic coast, but say 15 to 25 for the speeds, and even lighter on the west side with continued low clouds and fog, but dry conditions, showers developing over portions of the Brooks Range, back down in toward the Kobuk Valley, with thunderstorm conditions from the east side of the Nulato Hills westward in toward Denali Park and the western Alaska Range, Kenai Peninsula, Chugach Mountains, Talkeetnas once again. Probably see some scattered afternoon thunderstorm developing, with temperatures rising 60s to lower 70s once again. Showers over the Copper River Basin, risk of a thunderstorm. Mostly sunny, temperatures in the lower to mid 70s for the upper Yukon Valley. And mostly cloudy with showers most prevalent in the afternoon over the Panhandle, but nothing widespread and heavy. And that low pressure area brings rain, fog, and drizzle to the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, with that low center passing very close to Dutch Harbor. Higher pressure and maybe some clearing for the central Aleutians. And the outlook for Monday, that low slides southeastward, keeps a chance of rain and fog in over the Alaska Peninsula through the day, but dries out over the Fox Islands, and maybe some clearing Adak and Atka, but a lot of low clouds and fog over the Bering Sea up to the Pribilofs, with fog in areas and IFR right through the Bering Strait, coming back around the Arctic coast. Definitely lighter winds now on the eastern Arctic coast. Moderate showers developing over the west central Brooks Range, as well as the Copper River Basin. Thunderstorms extending from Eagle southwestward along that trough axis into the Kuskokwim Valley. Showers over the Panhandle. High pressure, light winds, low clouds and fog out over the Gulf of Alaska. Lows for tonight, upper 20s, lower 30s Arctic coast. In the 40s over the interior, right down to the North Gulf Coast. Lower 40s over the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, lower to mid 70s. Fairbanks area, upper Yukon Valley, much of the interior there, with 65 to 70 degree readings. The Sitna Valley, Madanuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula. And for the lows, upper 20s on the Arctic coast, followed by highs in the 70s over the central interior, with near 70 all the way down to Bethel.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic Sunday morning, IFR, North Slope Arctic coast, on down through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and all of the Bering Sea, and just about all of the Aleutians, western Alaska Peninsula, on up into Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, Togiak Bay, And looks like some IFR there over the northern Kuskokwim Valley up to just south of the Yukon River. And areas of marginal VFR across Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula. IFR southern Prince William Sound, but staying off the southeast coast. That'll push onshore for the eastern North Gulf Coast and on down to, say, into Elfin Cove, otherwise marginal VFR for the Panhandle. And mostly VFR, interior Alaska, with a swath of marginal VFR up the Kuskokwim River Valley to the western Alaska Range. Otherwise, the Yukon River Valley, VFR, just about the entire stretch of the way there over to Eagle. And the eastern Arctic coast, central coast as well, IFR, and some areas of marginal VFR showing up out over the Bering Sea, otherwise IFR. The Aleutians included, and that stays socked in out there through Monday morning. Alaska Peninsula, IFR, again up through the Bering Strait, Arctic coast, interior, VFR, some marginal VFR along and south of the and east of the Alaska Range with IFR down to Prince William Sound and on up across the eastern North Gulf Coast, across the eastern Copper River Basin, possibly as far on the other side of the range there to North Waytoke. Marginal VFR over the southern Panhandle. And for Monday afternoon, good VFR in the interior, but IFR pretty widespread there over the central western North Slope and Arctic coast, southwest across the DeLong Mountains to the northwest coast through the Bering Strait. And same story for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, mostly IFR with some areas of marginal VFR scattered around. IFR up to the southwest coast of Kodiak Island, otherwise marginal there, Shelikof Strait, marginal VFR up into southern Cook Inlet. Kenai Peninsula looks pretty marginal. IFR, Prince William Sound, east and North Gulf Coast, up into the Wrangell Mountains with marginal VFR again up to the eastern Alaska Range into Besna, maybe Tok. And for the Panhandle, not bad. VFR, mostly for the afternoon, except Elfin Cove, and then it becomes IFR for Yakutat. Passes Sunday, Anatuvik, VFR. Adigan, another VFR day there as well, up on both entrances. Lake Clark and Merrill starting out marginal, becoming VFR, risk of a thunderstorm, both passes in the area. Rainy, VFR, maybe marginal conditions on the west side, risk of an afternoon thunderstorm. Windy, VFR, chance of thunderstorms, midday on. And for Isabel, VFR, chance of thunderstorms. And for Mentasta, I think it'll be thunderstorm free and VFR for that pass. And for Tanita, VFR. Portage, starting out marginal, hopefully becoming VFR by afternoon into the evening. And for the Chilkoot and White passes, forecasting marginal VFR at times throughout the entire day on Sunday. Freezing levels, about 8,000 feet over the interior from the Yukon, 6,000 feet with a real weak upper level low over the northeast eastern Brooks Range. Cooler air mass, 4,000 feet from the Bering Sea across the Alaska Peninsula to south of the Gulf of Alaska there. Otherwise about 6,000 to 8,000 feet for the Aleutians. Icing, areas of mixed, light to isolated, very isolated, moderate southeast coast up into the eastern interior, and maybe a better chance of considerable moderate mixed icing over the west central interior, mostly the Kuskokwim Valley to the western Alaska Range, and some rime icing slipping on up into the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, but probably nothing moderate, more of the light variety there, freezing level of 10,000 feet. And for the jet stream, ridging up over the southwest Bering there, pushing it north of the Aleutians, but only about 50 to 90 knot northwest winds coming down across Nikolsky and then diving on down to the south, and then that splits there southwest of the Queen Charlottes with a 90 knot branch just coming up east of the southern Panhandle. Otherwise light wind flow across interior Alaska. Light wind flow also at 9,000 feet, Panhandle, Gulf of Alaska, all the way up to the Arctic coast, maybe some northerlies wrapping around to westerlies. That'd be the strongest there over the central Aleutians. And same pattern at 3,000 feet. Turbulence, light to isolated moderate chop, eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for the Atka Island area,
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. Well, what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. The water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015. And the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Not much different from yesterday. Still a little bit of ice left in Norton Sound there and some heavier ice on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. But ice-free now. Looks like up into the Bering Strait and thinning out there along the western Arctic coast. But still shore-fast ice clinging to much of the coastline from the Seward Peninsula on up. And then heavier ice on the eastern Beaufort Sea, and then thinning out north of the Barrier Islands. Coastal water forecast: west 20 knots tomorrow, 6 to 7 foot seas, and the north coast of the Panhandle west-southwest 10 to 15, 5 to 6 foot seas. Southerlies in the afternoon to 20 knots for Lynn Canal with 4 foot seas, and afternoon south breezes at 15 for Stevens Passage with 3 foot seas. Light variable winds to northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait. Outlook for Sunday: really light winds there for the far north coast, southeast at 5 knots, southeast 10 knots for the remainder of the coastline with 5 to 6 foot seas. Lynn Canal southeast at 15, south 10 for Stevens Passage, and south at 15 for Clarence Strait. Prince William Sound, south winds tomorrow at 15 knots with 2 foot seas, west 15 for the Middleton Island area, seas 5 feet, west 20 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories in the forecast for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. West wind sustained at 25 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas, and Cook Inlet southwest at 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Outlook for Monday: variable to east for Prince William Sound. Really a light wind day coming up there again with slight seas. Southwest 10 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Southeast 10 to 15 for the western North Gulf Coast area, and 4 foot seas. Light southwest breeze for the Barrens at 10, and southeast 15 for Kamishak Bay. Cook Inlet south of the Forelands, that's where the winds will be the strongest at 20 knots. Kodiak Island west southwest 20 knots, seas 5 feet, and Alaska Peninsula north side east at 15, south side southwest 15, and for Bristol Bay west winds of 15 knots with 3 foot seas. And for Monday, Kodiak Island south to southwest 15 knots, seas 3 to 4 feet, light northeast breeze for Bristol Bay 10 knots, slight seas. Alaska Peninsula northeast winds at 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas, and Sitkinak to Castle Cape southeast at 20, seas 5 feet. Eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories, 25 knots from the southwest, a little lighter on the north side of Unalaska Island, but seas running 4 to 8 feet. Small craft advisories for the central Aleutians, westerlies 25 to 30 knots, strongest on the Pacific side of the islands with 9 foot seas, and then Winds becoming lighter and easterly for the far western Aleutians of 15 knots. On Monday, east 20 knots, Shemya to Kiska. Kiska to Adak east at 15, and Adak and Atka specifically north to northwest 15, and small craft advisories for the eastern Aleutians. Northwest 25 to as high as 30 knots, with seas running 8 to 9 feet. And for the southwest coast, tomorrow, northwest 15 to 20 knots, strongest along the Yukon Delta coastline, and the Pribilofs northeast to 20 with 4-foot seas. North 15, St. Matthew Island, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, northwest at 15 with 3-foot seas. And for Monday, for St. Lawrence Island, north winds at 20 knots. That'll extend right down along the Yukon Delta coast of Nunivak Island. South of Nunivak Island, still north, 15 knots. Pribilof, small craft advisory, northwest 25 with 6-foot seas, west 20 for St. Matthew Island. And for Norton Sound, light northerlies at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Still looking at some brisk wind advisories for the far eastern side of the Beaufort Sea coast, say Kaktovik over toward Demarcation Point. Otherwise, 20 knots out of the east, diminished to 15 knots on the central coast, northeast at 10 for the west side. They're all the way down to Cape Thompson to Wales northwest at 10. And then for Monday, Wales to Cape Thompson, northerlies at 20 knots. Otherwise, light northwest breeze at 10 for the western Arctic coast. Kind of variable on the central and eastern portion, 10 knots, but generally holding east, but down to 15 knots, though, for the far eastern coastline. And for tonight, showers and thunderstorms diminish over the interior. Kind of showery, especially this evening over the Panhandle, and then light rain and fog move into the Pribilofs, definitely the central Aleutians, and to a lesser extent the eastern Aleutians, but IFR with light rain, fog, and drizzle into the western Alaska Peninsula. That'll hold and expand eastward to Sand Point tomorrow, and showers and thunderstorms once again over the interior in the afternoon, as well as the Panhandle, more showery conditions. A new front pushes into the far western Aleutians Monday afternoon, and sunny over the interior with.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.